Chapter 24 Disagree 2 months before the infamous Black Monday stock market crash of October 1987, I had begun my ministry at a congregation in Brooklyn, New York. The conflict that I witnessed for 6 years in that church grew out of the deep anxiety that significant financial stress put on the church, its school for kindergarten through 8th grade, and volunteer leadership. 14 years later, I saw a similar impact on people after the events of September 11th, 2001. Today, the turmoil following the 2016 presidential election has had the same effect. These times of societal distress, agitation, and anxiety often create an environment ripe for conflict and disagreements. In times of heightened anxiety, it seems tension more naturally enters our relationships. We all know conflict, though sometimes we like to call it by other names, such as disagreements, disputes, or the mild-mannered, we just see things differently. Regardless of what label we attach, the reality is that life without conflict is not possible. In the chapter on trust, I told the story of a couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. They had made it through 50 years despite their disagreements with one another. Whether it's a little spat over where the butter dish belongs, or a significant breach of trust over finances, intimacy, or how best to raise the kids, our relationships are fraught with conflict. That's true in our homes, our workplaces, and our churches. The singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell once commented on this subject in a 1989 interview. The conflicts that I witnessed on the playground were the same conflicts that would later play out in marriages, the corporate boardroom, and international affairs. Most of us will recognize the truth in that statement. Is there any difference between the arguments that 9-year-old children have while playing a basketball game and the conflicts we witness in the halls of Congress? Maybe the stakes are higher in Congress. Human beings have conflicts, disagreements, and arguments with one another all the time. Conflict is an inevitable part of human nature, and it's also a part of everyday spirituality. Why? It just might be an avenue for our most significant growth as people on the road toward spiritual maturity. Let's look at conflict from 2 perspectives. First, let's explore external disputes, those disagreements and debates we have on the playground and in the office boardroom. Then we will look at our internal conflicts, those struggles we experience in our hearts and minds. One of the surprising experiences many people have when they join a school board or a church or a youth baseball organization is how quickly they must grapple with differences. These entanglements reveal one of the great challenges for human beings. Fred responded to my request for stories of everyday spirituality with a terse 1-line email. I don't know how, but God is with me in my horrible job. This communication caught my attention, so I wrote back asking if we could talk. Fred, who asked that I change his name and not share the details of his employer, faced the challenge of honoring his own internal code. He is a principled man. In his supervisory capacity with a private company, he had begun to notice a series of defects in their most lucrative product line. Upon further research, Fred realized the problem was in a part the company sourced from another manufacturer. Fred reported the problem, and in short order it was corrected by the other company. However, Fred knew there were thousands of defective products already in the marketplace. He was concerned about public safety and about protecting the company's impeccable reputation. However, when he brought his concerns to upper-level management, they stonewalled him. Delays and more delays to his inquiries finally led him to conclude that they were not going to address the faulty products already in the marketplace. For months, Fred agonized over what to do until he could no longer live with his struggle. So he drafted a memo to the company president. He chose to go over his immediate supervisors. While the president of the company thanked Fred and appointed several others to address the problem, that did not mean Fred's conflict with his supervisors disappeared. In fact, the conflict escalated, and Fred experienced a series of punitive measures. He never received overtime, his salary was frozen, and he began receiving poor work reviews for the first time ever. When we spoke, I asked him about his plans for the future. I've experienced stress at a level I never knew existed, but I know I did the right thing. Yes, I'm looking for another job, but that will be a challenge as I know my supervisor will not give me a good recommendation, and other companies may perceive me as a troublemaker. I'm not a troublemaker. I want what's best for our clients and the general public. This has been the hardest thing in my life, but somehow I know God is with me. That keeps me going. How are we to address our differences with other people? Jesus discussed this matter in Matthew 18. I suspect this teaching emerged from personal experience. He said, "If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the whole church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among you." Matthew 18:15-20. The connection to everyday spirituality is right there in that closing sentence. My translation of this passage, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered, there's going to be conflict, and Jesus is going to be there amid that conflict. I, Jesus, am going to be there trying to work out the conflict, moving it towards some responsible resolution. But even if it's not all worked out, and everything doesn't turn out hunky-dory, that doesn't mean I'm not present." Our typical pattern for dealing with conflict, and this is true in the church, on the playground, and at the office, is to invert these instructions in Matthew's Gospel. We have some disagreement with someone. What's the first thing we do? We go and tell everyone else about the problem. It's called gossip, and we all participate in it. Why do we do this? Because we are spinning the story to make ourselves look good. The real path through conflict is to go into it and not run away from it. This means that to the person with whom we have differences and saying, "Let's talk." But before we do that, I think there's another step we need to take. For me, when I'm in a disagreement, I have to figure out what's going on inside me. Why am I pissed? What happened? How did I experience the events that led to the conflict? Once I have some clarity, maybe not perfect clarity, but enough, then I'm ready to go to the offending party and speak. For myself, I've found the best ways to start with a leading statement. "Frank, I know we had a difference of opinion on the matter you mentioned at last week's staff meeting. I want to work it out. Would you be willing to talk?" The reason to ask the last question, "Would you be willing to talk?" is to allow the other person an option. Most people will say yes, but you want to give them a choice. They may say no, "I'm not willing to meet," or "I need time." By asking them if they wish to talk, you give them some power. If they say yes, they will be more likely to own the outcome of your conversation. When you do meet with the other person, I like to use this opening line, which I learned from the author Brené Brown. When we were discussing such and such, this is what I heard. This is how I interpreted. This is the story that I'm telling myself. When you describe the event as your understanding of what happened and the narrative you are telling yourself, it allows the other person's defenses to come down. You are describing how you felt, what you heard. This approach will help the other person listen to you. The next step is listening to the other person. They need a chance to respond. Ideally, they will have picked up clues from your way of talking about the disagreement. They will say what they heard, thought, and felt. In my experience, 90% of our differences can be resolved at this juncture. This work is hard work. Anyone who has ever had to work through differences at a job, in a marriage, or with your neighbor down the hallway knows full well that this can be emotionally and intellectually draining. But if you've gone through the process, you also know that it is nothing short of a holy moment. The power of reconciliation is unlike anything else. Is this everyday spirituality? Of course it is. I hope you don't have to do this work every day, but only every so often. Let's turn now to the interior aspect of conflict. I'd like you to think of a person of your gender whom you do not like. It's okay. We all have these people in our lives. Who gets under your skin? Whose words or behaviors irritate you to an extraordinary level? If you're a woman, think of a woman who drives you crazy. If you're a man, think of a guy you'd like to punch in the nose, or at least see banished from your life. Got someone in mind? Now take a moment and write down a bunch of words that describe how you feel or what you think about this person. You could expand it to sentences. No, I mean it. Stop reading, stop listening right now, and do this right now. It's important. I'm going to trust that you took a little bit of time for this exercise. Have you got that person in mind? Did you write down some descriptive words? Okay, here's the hidden truth of this exercise. That person is you. I'll pause for a moment and let you absorb the shock. The first time I participated in this little exercise, I was not only shocked, but also angry. My psychology of religion professor, Dr. Ann Ulanoff, led us through this exercise as a way of introducing the topic of the human shadow. The idea that each of us has within us an unconscious dark or shadow side of our personality. I protested. What? I thought to myself. That's ridiculous. This guy is a real jerk. I mean, he wouldn't even be allowed in my apartment. The man I was thinking of had qualities I despise. He was harsh, strict, and judgmental. That's not me. I'm gentle and forgiving. It's taken me decades to realize that I've got both types of qualities in me, and I'm well served to integrate them. The concept of the shadow has its roots in the religious narratives, ancient literature, and philosophies around the world. We see it in the plays of Shakespeare and the novels of Stephen King. The psychiatrist Carl Jung articulated his understanding of the human shadow as the part of ourselves that we fail to know or see. We don't see it because it's unconscious. However, we can get glimpses of it in dreams, surprise behaviors, and maybe even a hint of it in the little exercise I just described. A few years after I'd gone through this exercise, I met a gentleman who bore a resemblance to the man I had thought of in Dr. Ulanoff's class. Then, more than a decade later, while serving a congregation hundreds of miles away, I met a third man who bore the same characteristics. Sheesh, this guy keeps showing up in my life. While his physical appearance changes slightly through the years, certain qualities remain. I keep running into the same man in my life. It's as if he's following me. He is following me because he is me. 30 years later, after experiencing marriage, parenting, life, and untold hours of therapy, I've realized the truth. I am that man, and all those characteristics. I am also gracious and kind and forgiving, but there is a part of my inner life that is harsh and rigid. I'm spending the second half of my life restoring a sense of wholeness. My younger years were spent in ego-building, approval-seeking, and accomplishment. These recent years, and I would venture to guess the rest of my life, is all about realizing aspects of my shadow and doing the deep work of integrating, learning from, and healing. We all have a conflict that is the turmoil of human identity. No single person is exempt. I'm hoping that you experience a sense of relief in reading these words. Yes, you too have a shadow. You have parts and aspects of your personality that are hidden from you, and that may be hard to accept. I once had a member of a congregation reveal to me that described her shadow indecisive, confused, scatterbrained. She served as an executive director of a nonprofit organization. Her reputation among her coworkers and colleagues was one of direct decisiveness and a clarion call for an honest evaluation. Her confession revealed an inner quality she had never attended to. But with this new insight, she was gradually able to exercise more compassion for people in her organization. Over the years, she learned to sit and listen to people, rather than resort to her previous practice of get to the point and let's get on with it. This slowly began to have a positive impact on the people she worked with, who grew to embrace her and in turn started to see her as a fellow human being rather than the nasty boss. Martin Luther's concept of simul justus et peccator, we are simultaneously saint and sinner, is most helpful here. We wrote about that in an earlier chapter. We human beings are simultaneously the angels and demons that the artist M.C. Escher captured in much of his artwork, particularly a piece titled Angel Devil from 1941. This ink drawing depicts angels and devils in such a way that it's difficult to know which you are looking at, when in fact you are looking at both. I encourage you to take a look at the image on the M.C. Escher website. Conflict is a part of everyday life. It's something we can't avoid, though most of us would love to do just that. Now, there are some personality types, for reasons too complex to engage in this book, who relish conflict. It is the energy that gives them energy. In some cases, they know they are alive only if they are engaged in conflict. But most of us are reluctant to engage in conflict, whether with our neighbors or our own shadow. We inevitably do engage in conflict, however. Sooner or later, you're going to have to talk to your sister or brother from whom you've been estranged. In his book, Born Standing Up, the comedian Steve Martin described an anguished life as the son of a jealous and emotionally cruel father. Yet he found himself hugging his ill and dying father in a brief moment of reconciliation. Inevitably, each of us will engage our shadow, if not consciously, then in a surprise. My harsh and critical spirit is an unpleasant wrestling partner. But do I have a choice? It's not possible to suppress, so maybe the better option is to dance with my hidden partner. Who knows? We might learn from one another. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I will be also. Yes, indeed, Jesus is in the midst of conflict. It's also worth noting, if you continue through Matthew 18, the disciple Peter asks Jesus how many times we must forgive someone who offends us. Matthew 18, 21-23. Is 7 times enough? Peter wants to quantify and legislate his way through life. He represents the legalist in all of us who desires a rule book for living. Jesus responds with an additional entry to the rule book. No, not 7 times, but 7 times 70. The point is like a Zen koan, in which the answer is not the answer, but more like a meditation. My translation: you keep forgiving, Peter. Keep it up until you can't count anymore. In other words, forgiveness is eternal. Grace abounds as we grapple with the conflicts of everyday life.